Oh, good morning, everyone. Thank you. I felt a little bit like I was starting an assembly then. I haven't done that for a long time. um, but yes, my name's Leeann, and I have been teaching for over a decade now in London and in London schools and also in the Middle East. I sort of carried on with education by going and doing my master's in inclusive and special educational needs. And I guess today, though, my perspective really comes from a lot from being a parent of 3 children. My youngest is 13, and the 2 adults, the first one is, my son is in his first year of studying law at university, and my daughter is in her final year doing graphic design. So I guess my journey has been a mixture of, those 2 things, sort of weaving in my knowledge of education and being in that system from a teacher's point of view, but also just how they've grown in their journey in navigating the system that we are in and trying to be successful in navigating through that system. A colleague of mine, well, ex-colleague actually, Agyare, she is also here with us, so she could also introduce herself.
As Leeann was saying, I'm a former colleague of hers from her time, well, she's still in the Middle East, from her time in the Middle East. I have been I taught for about 20 years in the UK, in Germany, and in the Middle East, initially as a junior in the English department. I've since moved on and really focused on the careers, work-related learning element in university transition for young people. And I also work as a storyteller for some of our younger year groups, specializing in Anansi stories and African.
Fantastic. This sounds like it's going to be a really good session. One of the things we've been tasked to do is to help children, young children under the age of 5, to chat more, to play together, and to read aloud. It's a massive initiative by the government around early years and looking at hungry little minds, because young minds just absorb what you give them, especially if this from the primary carer. How important is it to get a good foundation in education? This first 1,000 days of a child's life, 0 to 5-year-olds. Is it really important, or can we catch up? Let me ask that to Leeann first.
Well, I think, when you say education, it's very broad. We can be talking in so many different ways. If we're talking formal education, well, there are certain countries that don't start formal education until maybe they get to age 7 or older, and they've been successful in going through the education system. And then obviously in the UK, it starts a lot younger. So I think when we're talking about education, we need to be clear on what it is that they're learning at those stages. And so I think that, my parents made sure that I knew how to write my name and I could read a certain amount before I went there. But there was also making sure, well, how to go to the toilet and clean yourself up, and those kinds of things. And so you see a mixture, very much a mixture of when children coming into school, what they know from what they don't know. And they're all important, and they're all skills that need to be developed. And I think that's where a lot of it comes on, not relying on the education system to make sure that happens, but you yourself as a parent being able to go, right, this is what I want my child to know, and this is important for my child to take this direction. So in terms of the talking and the playing and the reading, definitely, I would agree 100%. One of the things that we use in schools at the moment is like the Talk for Writing, the Pia Corbett stuff. I don't know if you've heard of that. And when the schools first started using it, when I started using it, it was so lovely to see the children engage, because the idea behind it is that they learn stories orally, which relates to what Agyare just mentioned about, her being a storyteller. I've seen her in action and it is amazing. It's one of the skills I think that people don't necessarily have anymore or pass on through generations. And I think it is very much a cultural thing as well. But being able to hear stories, not just reading them, is an amazing thing. And I think helps in building character and building creativity and all of those kinds of things. So when we don't have books around and we don't have those conversations with our children, we're not interacting with them in that way, I think that's not going to be a great thing for them moving forwards, in them wanting to learn and wanting to embrace new things. I was thinking earlier, actually, because I was reading a lot at a young age. And when I thought about it only as an adult, I realized that at age 11, I remember 11 and 12, I remember reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. When I think about that now, I think that was an early age to be reading that kind of book. How I came across it, I don't know. I believe it probably belonged to my dad and it was left there. I don't even know if he read the book, but it was lying around. And I thought, oh, I'll take that. I'll have a read of that. So if we're not exposing, we're not allowing those opportunities to happen, and I don't mean by explicit exposure, but things that are around that allow our children to say, oh, I'm going to have a look at that, I'm going to have a read of that, then there's less chance of them being able to have those kinds of experiences. Same as I read The Silence of the Lambs at age 11. And again, I think that was my older sister, had a book lying around and I was like, oh, I'll take that. So, and I've tried to do that myself, hoping, because as hard as it is with young children trying to get them to read now, I kind of leave them hanging around on shelves and around the house, hoping it will lure them in to want to read.
So can I just quickly ask you this question then, Leeann? With regards to the 0 to 5s, it may not be so much about the education, because a lot of them, the curriculum, if there is one, is talking about knowing your world and that sort of thing. So it's not necessarily the structured pieces like formal education, as you said, but what sort of materials should you be giving to a 0 to 5-year-old? Is it specific pieces of information that we should be passing on to the parent so that they can pass on to the child to make that child school ready? What do we need to do? Is it just very organic, or should there be some specific pieces?
I do think it needs to be very organic. I think it needs to come from one of just seeing your child develop, whether that's, you have them in the kitchen and they're seeing that food just doesn't land in a packet on your, it just doesn't appear on a plate as they see it. There's a process to it. I think that's really important. An example that I will give to you is I remember taking the children on holiday once. We went to Jamaica, and we stayed at a friend's house in the country. So while we were there, this friend was going to have a dance at the house, at his house, and so he started making preparations. One of the preparations was he had a goat walking around in the yard. So as the day's progressing, the children are out on the veranda, they look out, they see this goat. And I realize there's a man out there about to slaughter this goat. So I go over to the children and I say, right, okay, I'm thinking, let me take them inside, because I don't think I really want them to see this happening. They're born in London. This is not something that's normal to them. So I go in and I say to them, look, they're going to kill the goat. So I would like you to come in so you don't have to watch. And then they were intrigued. They were like, no, I want to see it. And I came back in, thought about it some more, and I was thinking, am I traumatizing my children by making them see this? I go back and I said, no, seriously, and I start to explain what's going to happen. And they wanted to watch and see this process. And I thought to myself, well, you're not going to traumatize them, because children see this all the time in different parts of the world. Your children don't, because they live in London and they think that the meat comes from the butcher shop and that's it. And so it was a learning experience for them to see from beginning to end how this curry goat that was in the pot had come about. And so what I use as example just in saying that, you know, the little things that we can do about the house in teaching our children basic manners and respect and how to look after themselves, how to dress themselves, how to speak with other people, I think is another important skill that they can learn from a very young age. I've seen some really young children who are so articulate, and they can only be articulate because of the conversations that they are having at home, because their parents are open to having discussions with them. But I do want to, because I don't want to pass over what I was saying about the storytelling, and so I'd actually like Yar to interject and give her opinion on that.
Brilliant. Love to hear from you, Yar. Go ahead.
So my role in education is within the secondary sector. So storytelling for me is really a huge crossover to an area, or working with children that I don't ordinarily work with within my educational role. However, the ability to storytell, or the ability for all of us that have a story to tell, is something that is innate in us. And as a people, our tales were passed on orally. And this art and the traditional oral exposure that young people or children may have had more access to, perhaps when I was younger or way back when, is something that actually is a resource we're not tapping into as much now. And as a resource, the wastage in us not doing what is natural, what is naturally, you know, innate in us as a culture, is something that, if I'm able to resurrect or work with young children, more often than not, has a very positive outcome in their own ability to build confidence in being able to tell their own stories. I often go to, you know, primary schools or nursery settings, and their response to how traditional tales are, you know, come about with regards to the rhythm and the rhyme and the actual building of the story, is something that I'm not talking at them, they're also participating in. And that's something that can be transferred within our home environment. It's a learning that doesn't have to wait till you get to school, because as parents, as adults, we're all storytellers. We all have something to share. We all have something to say. And in doing that, we're giving our children, our young people, okay, you know, the thumbs up to say, you know, share your story. Tell us about your day. Tell us about what's been happening in your area today. It's not a case of prescribing certain tales or prescribing certain stories. It really is a case of trying to make sure that we're open, one, to conversation, and two, to receiving what our children and young people also have to tell us. A lot of the tales that I do share always have a moral, because Anansi's stories always had a moral about how cunning he is, how he's trying to, con this person, and then there's a moral at the end that the children deduce, you know, how that can be implemented in their day-to-day. And because they're part of the storytelling process, because they're part of the tale, because they're part of how the story evolves, they realize that their voice is also important. That, yes, I'm there to tell a story, but also their contribution is something that they're using to learn, to grow, to mature, and to understand the environment in which they live and study and they grow up in. Stories are something that everybody can do. Every single parent, every single person, every single child, they all have a story to tell. And that then, in turn, leads to the confidence. It then leads to the being able to put things down on paper. It leads to having the confidence, actually, of identifying what worked well and perhaps didn't go as planned, but does that mean I shy away from it? No, it means that I go and I tell the story a different way next time, or I go and try and include this idea or element that was introduced at a session another time. Everybody is a storyteller. Every parent, every adult, every child has the story to tell, and it's something that's innate within our culture, within our custom. And I don't see if we have that resource, that we leave it sitting idly whilst you know, we're developing other means.
Oh, gosh.
We may have lost Yar. Hopefully she could come back in. I was tempted to ask her to tell us a story. Fantastic. Thank you, Yar. I'm not sure if you can hear us, but you've frozen on screen. But I get the point, and I think the fundamental piece is that everybody has a story to tell, and that we can actually learn from the children. We can learn what's going on in their world. We can learn their perspectives of how they see the world. And I think that's really important. Brilliant. Before I get everyone else to ask you 100 questions, Leeann, could you tell us a bit about your son and his achievements and his GCSEs? What was his journey? How did it move from being at risk to great reward? Please tell us. I mean, and that's for parents in the room who've got children who are older than the 0 to 5 year olds that we've been focusing on typically. But those ones who are 11 years old, who may be at risk of peer pressure, extreme peer pressure. Tell us your story, Leeann, please.
Well, first and foremost, my children are all very different in personality, but also just in terms of what they like in terms of schooling and how they respond to the system that we're in. So for me, I had to recognize quite earlier on that, okay, with my eldest child, what the strengths and weaknesses were and which way would be best for her to navigate through the system. So for example, going to do A-levels would have been torturous, but she left sixth form with triple distinctions. Had I put her through that process of saying, no, well, you must do A-levels, well, who's to know what would have happened? She's been very, very successful in then navigating her way through the rest of her career with university. So my concerns, and I think a concern for a lot of people, is when it comes to our boys, because we know that they then can, you know, fall off the radar. They, you know, the system hasn't been prepared for them. And so what happened with my son is he's always very, you know, very academic. He likes history. He's got very good memory. But what happened is he was losing interest. And part of the reason he was losing interest, maybe because of the content, but also because as he entered into secondary school, the people that he was surrounded by weren't as interested in those subjects, weren't as interested in schooling. So obviously he had to assimilate in a way, you know, you find him friends, you're getting on with people and what have you. But he quickly, very quickly realized, I can coast. I do not have to make any effort whatsoever being in this school or being in any way. So the contributions that he may have started making then became less, you know, in class discussions and that kind of thing. You know what kids are like, you know, they all have terms for each other, you know, like a nerd or a geek or that kind of thing. Nobody wants to be called those names. So then you have to fit in, you have to adjust. And he could literally just coast without wanting to, so that he was comfortable, so that he didn't seem out of place in his environment. Well, obviously as a parent, you know, you're not going to be happy with that. That wasn't going to be good enough. Now, years before this, I'd already decided I didn't want them growing up. I didn't want them having this education in the UK because I could see that there was too many things that weren't for them and worked against them in many ways. And so we relocated, and that's when we first went to the Middle East, and he went to a school there. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still a British education system that we were in. And of course, there were less people that looked like him in that environment. So it could easily have gone just as bad. But the difference was the people that were around him did want to learn. They had come from families that had said, you know, like, that were strong in their cultural beliefs, strong in their want to succeed, and taught their children from a very young age. This is important. And so those people that he found himself around made him kind of sit up and go, all right, it's time to up my game again. It's time to actually compete with the rest of them. And that worked out really well for him. But also it was a case of having a community of people around that were able to give their input, be able to support in a lot of ways. And I think community is really, really important. Having people around you that have the same ideas, the same moral compass is important. I do believe in the saying, you know, it takes a village. And so all of those things combined, and the conversations, the discussions that we were having along the way, made sure that he was always positioning himself to be able to say, right, this is where I want to get to. So these are the things I'm going to start to put in place to make sure I get there. So for example, before I even get to the kinds of things that he was doing, within a couple of weeks of us going into this new school, you know, there were a bunch of us that had arrived, and he was buddied up with a friend, and someone that is a very, very good friend to him still now. And the boy that he was buddied up with was in the top set classes, and they were trying to figure out, well, where were they going to place him? Based on the reports that I'd given them, I suppose, and maybe that he'd come from the UK. And also, I guess, with the person that he'd been buddied up with, he was put into the top set classes. And within a couple of weeks, just by chance, and I was lucky that I was in a position where I was actually in the school and I could come across his English teacher. She stopped me and she said, listen, she's an English lady. She said to me, they are trying to take your son out of this class to make room for somebody else to come into this class. She said, I'm not having it. I am not having it, because he is more than capable, and this is where he's supposed to be. And she turned around and she said to me, the reason they want to take him out of this class, because they want to put, the person that they want to put in this class is a white boy. And this boy had arrived at the same time. Now, I don't know who they was. I was just appreciative of the fact that this lady, white English lady, had come to me and said this to me. And that not only did she was aware, she realized what was happening. And she wasn't prepared to stand for it. And she was only telling me so that we were on the same page, so that should anything come of it, that I would also be able to stand up and say, well, no. But I was in a privileged position of, one, being in a school and having that interaction with that person. Two, that there was somebody who could actually stand up and say this for us, because had she not done that, you know, the likelihood is he would have been moved into a different set. And can I say that he completed his GCSEs and he did get all A's and A stars, 10 of them. And he did very, very well. But what I'm saying is, my point is that even though it worked for him in one way to be removed from one place to go to another, you know, there were still things that were working against us, working against him. But then he put a number of things in place. You know, again, like I say, the conversations that we were having, he was part of the Model United Nations, doing debates as a delegate. He became the Secretary General for Model United Nations, giving him the opportunity. He was interviewing people for positions. You know, he was out there speaking with children from all different schools across the country and all that kind of stuff. And he became you know, he was doing things that some adults have never done and preparing himself for what he knew he wanted to get to. So a lot has gone in place to make sure that they are able to position themselves to be able to navigate their way through. And the same with my daughter. She realized, you know, at an early stage, well, I want more than what's actually on the plate and people are telling me I can have. She did a year away in the Netherlands and worked there and went to the university in the Netherlands and gained a whole new experience from that. And all the way through their journey, they're going, right, okay, what is it that I want next? What is it that I want to achieve and how am I going to get there? And sometimes that changes slightly, but the conversations are happening around it to make sure that they are comfortable and confident in what it is that they want to do.
Fantastic story. Fantastic story. Well done for encouraging your son. 10 A's and A stars. Brilliant stuff. Brilliant stuff. David, your hand is up. Please go ahead. Just need, oh, actually, David, bear with me a second. Oops. There's a delay between muting and unmuting. Bear with me 1 second. There you go.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mike, for the opportunity. Leeann, thank you. I thought it was a fascinating story. You had me captivated, and I just want to commend you on the level of tenacity and investment it takes, and the courage really to say that you're leaving one country to go to another to make sure that the future of your children is secure. I take my hat off to you. One thing that struck me though in your contribution was the notion of race. You talked about them wanting to remove your child so that they can put in a white child. I've done some work with Mike and these guys and know that from the race disparity audit in the department for, or at least in the government department at Cabinet Office and Downing Street, there's been evidence that race plays a factor. And I just want to ask you a question. How have you experienced racialized notions of education? And how has your chat, play, read activity in the formative years of your children contributed to building resilience against an inevitable racism they will face as they go into the world? I hope that's clear.
Okay, well, if I don't address something, then you can come and tell me afterwards. But with regards to, I think for me, it's all about balance. I know that when I send my children out to school, they are presented with what the British curriculum has to offer, and whatever teachers that they are presented with, whatever you know, notions they've come into teaching with, and however they see my child as they walk into that school, I can't control those things. And so therefore, for me, it means that I have to create the balance at home. So I honestly believe that a lot of this comes back to cultural identity and being confident and being aware of who you are, where you've come from, and all of the strengths and richness that comes with that. And so I made sure from a very early age that my children were, as much as possible, immersed and knew and understood themselves and where they come from. So at the time, I wasn't aware of Pan-African schools around the country. If I had been, I would have been sending them there. But it meant that it was on my head to make sure that they learned the things that I thought that they needed to know. And so, you know, when we're at home and we're, like I was saying before, about reading books and watching things and just dropping in conversations, I believe that the curriculum really needs to be integrated with a Black perspective for there to be any sort of impact for our children and for them to feel comfortable being in as the curriculum stands. But seeing as that's not happening, and you know, we don't know how long it will take for that to happen, I have to make sure that that happens from home. So where it comes down to foods, music, conversations, linking things in so that they don't feel apart from, they can see how they're connected to. So that, as far as like, you know, the chat, play, all that kind of stuff, for me, is where it all comes in. And so when we read books, for example, I would go and I would buy my Anansi books and I would read them in dialect. They're getting cultural input, they're getting the whole idea of, you know, what Agyare was saying about oral stories, they're getting the idea of literacy, they're learning and morals and all the rest of it that come with it. When I traveled, I would pick up books, like when we were in Jamaica, and not because there was necessarily a different content, but because when they opened the pages, they saw people that looked like them. So again, it wasn't displacing them, it wasn't making them feel like they're odd in some way. So, you know, conversations that happen, unfortunately, and I know that I'm not the only one, when, especially with my girls being young, coming up, they wanted to, oh, can I have my hair straightened? No. But, you know, there would be a conversation around why, and making sure that they love their hair and they love the skin that they're in. And the food, you know, like I remember my daughter being maybe 6 or 7 and not wanting to eat her yam that was in the plate. And I had to be quite direct and say, look, we are not the way that we are because we're eating a diet of bangers and mash every day. You are going to eat it. And that conversation never came up again. And actually now, even my 13-year-old will go in the kitchen and she will cook up a Caribbean dish because that's what she feels like. And I feel like in order for us to be able to be successful in the system that exists as it stands, we have to have a degree of code switching. Code switching meaning, you know, as a linguist term, that you have to be able to move in between one language and the other quite smoothly so that we can exist in the world that we're living in comfortably, understanding where we're coming from, where we're going. And you can only do that with knowledge, with reading, with playing, with conversations. Does that answer your question?
Not only that, I'm on a debate tonight. I'm going to be using the content. Thank you, thank you. Brilliant. It was interesting. Sorry, Mike, that yesterday we had some ladies in the cafe, and they were saying that actually the professionalization of education has actually had a negative impact. And some of the people who were here today, they were saying that actually it was these components of cultural identity, these components of love, these components of compassion, these components of communication that are often strategies that are adopted by people who come in who appear to be less qualified than the teachers, that actually perform that kind of recalibrating task of bringing young people and children who have fallen between the cracks in the system back into alignment and helping them to achieve. And we heard from a lady who did just that, who was abused as a young lady, sexually and physically. She fell through the cracks, but it was the love and compassion of a teacher that brought her back. And she was saying that that's what she's now dealing with. So there seems to be a theme that's emerging around the professionalization of the delivery of education not being the most effective way of being able to develop a fully rounded human being. And so that education is more than just an accumulation of facts, but something to do with the formulation of and development of people's characters so that they can be good citizens in the world. So it sounds like your children are doing that and you've been instrumental in that. So as a sister, I take my hat off to you and say big respect.
Thank you.
But we've got Rox from the DFE in. Rox, would you please go ahead? Your hand is up.
Hi, Leanne. Hi. I just wanted to say thank you, and you're an amazing example of the power of parent in a child's education, and you know, having the courage to do what was right for your child, but what you did in the home has enabled your children to thrive. And I love the way that you described, use the term cultural identity and competency. So the fact that you know that you're fighting against a system, you empowered yourself with knowledge, motivation and drive to do something different. Can you talk a bit more on that in terms of the importance of cultural identity and competence?
Sorry, can I talk a bit more on?
When you talked about cultural identity and competence, so as parents, if the system around you isn't working and it's not enabling your children to thrive, now we can have cultural identity, but we can, I think it's something that Mike's been teaching within the sessions, is that as parents, we can live in that pain and we can say, the system is awful, our kids are going to do really badly, but you did something that was actually, well, actually, I have the power as a parent to do something different for my kids. I'm not sure if there was anything more you wanted to say on that. But again, like David, I applaud your courage in terms of taking a step and doing something different so that your kids could thrive.
Right, see, what could I add to that? I think it's important that, because no matter what, they're going to come up against things all the time. And I think it's important to continue. It's never a conversation that happens and then that's it, like it's done. I think you always have to revisit it and always reanalyze. When one thing that happened when I first got into teaching, I was invited to an interview. It was in East London, and it was an outstanding school. And it was just, I remember walking into the school thinking, oh, this is lovely. Like, you could see they had djembe drumming happening in the playground as an after school activity. Never seen that before. I don't think I've seen it since. The deputy and the head teacher were both of Indian origin. And I remember doing the interview and thinking, oh my gosh, this is, the interview's going really well. And they even, invited me for lunch afterwards. I was like, yeah, I got this. And it was great. And, they'd said to me at one point that, oh, we don't have any Black teachers here. And so 2 things happened, because obviously I'm thinking, yeah, this interview's going very well. And then when that was dropped in, you're kind of thinking, am I the token Black person in the school? But you don't want to believe that, because you're thinking, but oh my gosh, I've never seen both a deputy and a head teacher who are both Asian as well. So that happened. When we went to lunch, the lunch was the best lunch I had ever come across in a school cafeteria before. It was a curry. It was an Indian curry, and it wasn't a restaurant Indian curry. This was a proper curry, right? And so I remember I was offered the job and everything, but I turned it down. I turned it down because I couldn't face the idea of a 3-hour commute every single day. And so instead I went to another school that was a lot closer. Not the diversity that I had seen at this school. And so skip forward maybe a few months or a year later, I had put my child into this new school, my son. I put him into the school where I was to make things a little bit easier. And one day, it was lunchtime, I get a call from the lunchroom saying, look, he's not eating his lunch. None of us can get him to eat. Can you come over? So I went over to the cafeteria, and I looked and I said, well, what is it? It's a frittata. I wouldn't eat that. So like, from that point, like, they did not have school dinners after that. But what occurred to me was, look at that. You have a school where in this area it's predominantly, it's a high Muslim percentage living in the area. The head teacher and the deputy are representative of those people, versus a school that was none of those things. And so when those children were going into school, they were able to have something very similar to what they would have experienced at home. But my child, however, he's going in and he's not interested in what's being offered. And so I think that was another thing that, again, in terms of adapting, in terms of being able to know, what it is that you will want, what it is that you will stand for, and how you go about making sure that you can still survive in that, because every single day our children are faced with something else that they have to deal with, no matter how small or how large, whether it's something quite explicit or something that's just, okay, you just need to deal with this.
Yeah, just a quick contribution. A thought, the work that's being done around 0 to 5-year-olds, one of the things that is evident, and the 2 stories we've heard with Dr. Yasidi, is that actually a tutor recognized their talent. What we heard with the story that was told to us by Leeann was that a tutor stood in the way of an abortive action in terms of a child's education. We also know that between the age of 0 to 5, which is the age in which children are most impressionable in their brains being formed, that racism takes place within that space. So on one occasion, myself and Claire, who's our program manager, was invited into Lambeth to do delivery to teachers who lead across the borough on 0 to 5-year-olds. And one of the things the teacher was telling us, that even at that age, they recognized within themselves their predisposition towards dealing favorably with white children after the weekend than dealing with black children. So they would ask the white child, how did your weekend go? What did you do? What books did you read? But they would ask the black child to come in, put your bag away and go to your table. And so there's a real challenge here about the racialization of education and the way education's being delivered, and the way those people who are responsible for developing the child actually are critical about their own selves, and also are available to be trained so that they can release some of their bias. So unconscious bias is not just something that affects everybody equally. I do a lot of training in corporates with unconscious bias. And I always tell them, listen, unconscious bias, everybody has it, but not everybody has the power to affect people equally with their unconscious bias. People can be numerically and culturally dominated so that the unconscious bias becomes a predominant culture which disenfranchises individuals. And I think that's important to note within education, but particularly within those of us that have impact or influence on children between the age of 0 to 5, that we have to take some precautionary measures, and we have to be proactive in ensuring that we socialize in the cultural norms that Leeann talked about, that gives them that resilience to deal with the institutional racism that's endemic in the education system.